Dawdu, welcome to the show. So we met on Twitter, started talking about some concepts around consciousness and the book Power versus Force that we both have read. Can you start with telling us about yourself and how you came into the areas of consciousness and Bitcoin?
Most definitely. Thank you, Sama, for allowing me to, have a chance to speak on your platform. So my name is Dawdu M. Montana. I'm a Bitcoin writer and content creator. The first introduction I had with Bitcoin was in 2017, but I didn't look at it from a conscious standpoint until about 2020 during the pandemic. My focus internally was for, number go up, utilize Bitcoin as a store of value. My first child was actually born in 2020, so I was scrambling to have something to pass down to her outside of fiat money. Being the first generation individual out of my family structure, all of my family's immigrants to this country, I knew what it was like to struggle and live in that low vibrational energy of lack. Bitcoin was one of those first investments that didn't seem controlled. And once you realize how many lives is changing every day, it truly is paradigm shifting. The fiat system has distorted the economy so much. It forces people to be on the hamster wheel, working for the man for decades and praying that you have enough to retire in Florida with, your aged toes in the sand. And that's kind of like what has boiled down to what the American dream is all about. And I truly feel like as we continue to move through time and space as humanity goes, I think that the ideas and things that are being highlighted, we have lost meaning to our lives. We have lost what it means to reap the fruits of our labor. And instead of that, we find value in materialism, which is, in my opinion, detrimental to the human spirit. So, we can continue down this rabbit hole of like Bitcoin and consciousness, but that's just kind of like a quick synopsis of like my take on Bitcoin and consciousness, or like the introduction to how I came about it.
Yeah, good. And which country do you live in now?
I live in America.
So this book then, Power versus Forces, was also for me when I read it 3-4 years ago now, a very mind-bending experience. It influenced me a lot. Could you tell us about this author, David Hawkins, just so the audience know about him and his book?
Yeah. So David Hawkins is an author and a spiritual teacher. I mean, he's written a lot of books, but his most notable work is the book Power versus Force. And essentially, Hawkins' model attempts to map human consciousness and differentiates between actions brought about by force, a movement or point which goes against opposition, and power, which is like an energy or a standing field that doesn't move. Essentially, it's like fear versus love and suffering versus ultimate consciousness. So the Hawkins scale, which is a scale that he has in the book, going through certain levels of consciousness, that scale is important because when you start measuring consciousness and defining it, Hawkins has to be, in my opinion, in your top 5 educators on the subject.
Yeah, he was doing vast amounts of research around this. Can you talk about his testing method a little bit? So like how he came to these conclusions of these numbers of consciousness?
Yeah, so to my understanding, I believe that he did something around like muscle testing, and also he did things where he had a model that showed all the emotions and the life views of humanity on a humanity scale and an individual scale. And it's very interesting because throughout life, a human being's life, they're trying to struggle and, battle between the vacillation between trying to master and gain power and trying to minimize the use of force to persuade people or to move about in society. And Hawkins did a great job of kind of measuring some of these processes that we go through as human beings. He has a scale where he talks about shame, guilt, apathy, fear, pride, all the things that, depending on your energetic aura and the type of person that you are and your environment and how you came about, your experiences. Certain people have harder times ridding themselves of pride or gain or shame or guilt, versus some other people are just more easily in a place of love and peace and joy. So I really think that using affirmations and meditating and kind of focusing on your inner self is very pertinent to gaining a better understanding of power versus force. And I think that Hawkins himself has also went through some of these trials and tribulations. And I think that he had a really good documentation process where he could jot down some of these rungs that we go through as a level of consciousness as human beings on this planet.
Yeah, yeah. But did he ever talk about affirmations? You mentioned affirmations.
Yeah, he starts talking about affirmations more once you start getting into the power side. So on the rung of levels of consciousness, there's something called courage. So once you get courage, that's the first rung after you're leaving the force methodology of consciousness. So courage is kind of like using affirmations where you have to be brave in a sense and express yourself, and to be comfortable with what you believe in and what you think is right versus wrong. And I think that the first step to changing your energetic aura, to changing who you are as a person, to become more enlightened, you have to start with courage, and you have to start with affirming that you're courageous in your mindset and in your consciousness to manifest that into reality.
Yeah. So on those middle levels there, but I guess for the higher levels, it's not so necessary with affirmations anymore. Or what do you think?
Like when you think about it, right? Like right below courage is pride, and a lot of people, especially like I don't want to like label, but like a lot of Americans or people from European countries, other places, like, not third world countries, I think that pride is a big energetic force in our society now, especially like with the last president. Pride was kind of like one of those things where people really had a lot of like doubt and worry and sadness and disencouragement. And it was based around, saying, make America great again, or make this better than that, or we're above you versus we're below this. And I think that pride and courage requires a kind of paradigm mind shifting, thought process. And all the power that we have originates from the mind, where, force is rooted in the material world. And force is largely self-serving, right? So power is more of a positive energy for the greater good and for the joy of humanity. And I think that as you go up the scale of power, you have like neutrality, willingness, acceptance, reason, love, joy, peace. These are all things that as you become comfortable who you are in the world around you, it's easier to go up that ladder. But it's definitely like a growing pain process where us as human beings have a difficult time letting go of these lower energetic vibrational energies that we all deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I hope it makes sense also to the audience. If we talk about the fear and force, for example, so if we feel fear, then we tend to use force to fix that fear, right? But if we are higher up on the scale, neutrality or acceptance, we feel less fear, and we instead can let life sort of flow. Have you thought about the consequences of actions of force versus actions of power? Like if you do an action based in a lower frequency, what happens then compared to what happens if you do an action in a higher frequencies?
Yeah, most definitely. I think that on the force side, when you have things like shame, for example, which is the lowest form of force, which fosters humiliation and a miserable outlook on life. I kind of think of like Adam and Eve, how they felt shame when they ate the apple. And, shame sometimes can be the furthest thing from God. And, I think that like people that are guilty and shameful, they might be guilty about what they've done or what they've witnessed. And I think that we as human beings, we come to this earth to make mistakes and complete our journey. And I think that a lot of times those lower level vibrational energies kind of reverberate through time and space and through the universe at a higher level, because it requires a lower self energy, a darker energy, where it's a lot easier to, be in fear, or to shame someone, or to make someone feel guilty, or feel guilty upon yourself, versus power, which is something that starts with, the highest level on the scale. So you would say like something like a Jesus or a Buddha or a high level shaman, they can achieve those extensive heights of power, because the challenges is that we have to process and make the courage and willingness to accept we are wrong and embrace love and peace. And that takes a different level of the mind muscle. It takes a different level of understanding of who you are and what your part and what your role plays in society and in humanity.
Yeah, and mind, you say there, and because I've been rereading the book now the last couple of days so I remember a little bit more. And so level 400, for example. So it's a scale from 0 to 1000. And then it's many different moods or states of consciousness there. So 400 is sort of the last one where the mind is used as the reason, the rational mind. And then it's this critical level there up to 500, when your life become based in love. And this is then when, from what I understand, when you move from being reason-based, being rational, to more being into following your heart in the next category there. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, most definitely. And this is kind of interesting too, because like it starts to tie into Bitcoin a little bit later down the road. But like you have in between reason, you have acceptance, and you have love. And I think that to reason with someone, or to understand where someone is coming from, you have to first accept what they have, what they're bringing to the table, and you have to have almost that unconditional love for something or someone. And I think that is like the breaking point between having an expanded ultimate consciousness versus having a contracted consciousness. And in the book, Hawkins talks about that a lot, where like you're having this kind of like omega process of having these different field dynamics of consciousness. So reason to me is something that requires patience. It requires you to be still and to be in a meditative state, so that you can really consciously think about, why is this or why is that, right? Or what is the reason behind something? What is the reason behind why I feel this way? Or what is the reason why this person feels this way about me? And I think that is like a huge component to this scale that Hawkins has, because each rung of the scale, or each number, or numerical number on the scale, requires a different challenge and a different process on how to digest it consciously.
Yeah, so let's dive into this with Bitcoin then.
Yeah.
And how are you drawing some parallels with Bitcoin and this scale?
Yeah, so I I think that the idea that we have around all these emotions, especially in modern day society, a lot of times you can really think about it in a sense of people mainly having a lot of these emotions around money, right? Most people work jobs that they hate out of survival, or greed, or pride, or control. And a lot of people would rather work themselves and be unhappy just to make money. How Bitcoin fits into this is Bitcoin is sound money, and a powerful tool to unshackle the human spirit and create free markets. The influence of money has been in the hands of central planners, and the ethics or the force on the population through various means has made Bitcoiners look at where they have to bring power back to themselves, to their money, to sovereignty, in a more wholesome future fashion. And I think that these ripple effects of emotions and leverage to not have the ability to solve their own problems has left humanity defeated. And I believe Bitcoin is bringing back sovereignty, and with that comes responsibility. And, I always think of like nature, right? Nature in its most unfettered manner can be scary and wild when you look at nature from a raw aspect, right? And I feel like man has tamed himself so far from the point of nature where we can go and enjoy the beach or the mountains and the countryside without worrying about bears or sharks or tigers. And when you look at like the indigenous peoples of this planet, their levels of consciousness versus modern man was a lot higher because they were more connected to a one force. They were more connected to a decentralized process of thinking. And I think that that's the same thing with our money. Bitcoin removes man's ability to manipulate money because man cannot just print more of it out of thin air. This runaway printing of money has ballooned the assets of billionaires, the debts of our children, and the cost of living for the poor and the working class. And I think that that debt, that cost of living, and that pressure to make something of yourself, to free yourself, and to have wealth and to have a store of value is what's causing a lot of the karmic debris and the high levels of force on the planet that we're currently seeing right now.
What is the cause of this, you think? Like, if you have to point out, like, at this time where it comes from, or do you think it's natural evolution and this is where we are in the humanity's consciousness evolution?
Yeah, I think that we have good energy and we have bad energy, right? And I think that that's always been the case on the planet. Bitcoin is fueled around energy, but it's like, how is that energy measured, right? Our bodies are electrical in many senses, and like the electrical pulses that power our hearts, in our blood pressure and things of that nature. I think that as we continue on our journey as a human force, I think that we are now shaking free of some of the shackles of control, in not all aspects, but in some aspects, and mainly around having the freedom to express, what is value and what is it like to have something that someone else cannot take from you, not have a centralized entity be in control of your destiny. And I think that this is all a part of this mass awakening that we're seeing on the planet currently. And I think that, with any awakening or with any process of freedom or liberation, you're always going to have some growing pains there, some levels of fear or uncomfortability, because as human beings, we don't like change. We like constant, right? So I think that Bitcoin coming into the world in 2009 was kind of like a checkmate towards the central banks and a checkmate towards government tyranny. And not, you have like Occupy Wall Street, for example, right? But I think that Bitcoin was like the remix to that, because now you're putting power into the hands of the people versus putting the powers into the hands of the bank or someone that, an overlord or someone that a king, for example, right? So I think that as we continue to grow as human beings, we're going to have more and more people realizing that peace, love, joy, having a network where people are free to transact, no matter your race, your color, your creed, your gender. These are all things that Bitcoin is going to allow, because Bitcoin does not care about your political background or, what God you believe in or what your spiritual proclivity is. It's more about having a network of people globally being able to share value and pass that value from person to person without having a toll or gatekeeper be in control of your destiny.
Yeah. Could you say that as humans go up this ladder, as we say, that humanity is also moving up this ladder as a collective? Or is that a completely different story? What do you think?
No, I definitely agree with you. I think that Bitcoin makes all classes of consciousness and freedom equal. The fact that we are all connected at this place, at this moment, at this frequency is divine timing. And I always harp to people through my writing and through some of the stuff that I read, whether it's Breed Love, Tomer, A lot of these different individuals, I always think about, please don't waste it. Don't waste this unique time and space in history, because, we have to continue to build and connect with like-minded people who want to see real change in the world. And of course, these things are not going to happen overnight, of course, right? But these are all little small little tasks that we're all doing as a human race that's building a bigger future and a better future. And I think that that is super important for the generations that precede us, because what we're doing now will reflect on where the future is going to be down the road.
In the book, he writes that he measured humanity's average around 204, but it was quite a while ago since he wrote this book. Is it 20 years old?
Yeah, I think it was like the early 2000s.
So do you think, what if you were guess now, what do you think humanity, has it gone up or down, or where do you think it has come in since he wrote that book?
I think in the first world, in the first world countries, I feel like it's gone down a little bit, because I feel like we are now kind of reflecting on, in some senses, paying for some of the things that we've done to the third world and for more disenfranchised communities and people on the planet. I think that the people that are in the third world, or in countries where they're less controlled by money, they have other issues, but I think that they have a more sense of self, right? So like I said, like I'm first generation. So my family comes from Africa and the Caribbean. And in those countries, money is not number one on your scale of influence in society. People are more family oriented. People are more focused on, building things as a collective. And I think that in those places, people are starting to have a better understanding of that, because they're kind of locked out of the current, technical revolution that we're seeing for now. Michael Saylor has a book called Mobile Wave, where he says that the world will be connected by these mini computers called cell phones. And as, Bitcoin becomes more ubiquitous, and as, the understanding of freedom money becomes more ubiquitous, more people from these disenfranchised areas of the planet will start to connect with each other, converse with each other, and start to realize that we're all human beings on the same planet, and we all have to connect with this unconditional love to free ourselves from some of the centralized entities that have kind of been in control of the planet for, several centuries. And I just think that it's all a part of the cycle of the planet. I feel like we have highs and we have lows, and we have certain times on Earth where, certain lower vibrational things are in play. And then we have other times on the Earth where higher vibrational things are in play. So I think that Hawkins, I think he passed in 2002. So from then to now, so many things have changed. Humanity has changed. We've had a lot of like crazy things go on in the world. And I think that it's just a part of the process of kind of shedding away those old ideals and kind of bringing ourselves into this brave new world where we can be more in control of what we think is good versus what we think is bad.
Yeah, so I consider Bitcoin to have a high frequency, a very high frequency, and it's with every block, it's just spreading this high frequency into the world, and it attracts people to connect with the network. If you would guess, what number would you set on Bitcoin?
On the Hawkins scale, you mean?
Yeah,
I really think that it's around 350 or so. I'd say like 350, 360, where it's kind of on the acceptance scale. And I think that the biggest thing, like when you're talking about like hyper Bitcoinization, mass adoption, acceptance is always the word that comes to mind for me. And you have to think about like the emotion that invokes, right? Or the life view that acceptance, is on the Hawkins scale. So like the emotion of acceptance is forgiveness. And I think that we have to forgive people that have made mistakes with our money in the past and move forward with like a harmonious, which is the life view, which is like harmony. And I think that Bitcoin is all about harmony, because it's all about gathering people into this network and having people join the network. And there's no barrier of entry. You don't have to be rich. you can be poor. It doesn't really matter where you're coming from or where your financial background comes from or your educational background comes from. Bitcoin accepts everyone, no matter where you come from, like I said earlier. So I think that for me, I think that as of right now, Bitcoin is in the acceptance stage. And I think that as it grows and the network becomes bigger, that it will start to move up higher on that scale where, people are going to start to realize that it's not really about money. It's about the energetic, money is like a concept where us as human beings, we place value upon it. When God created human beings, he didn't say like hair, like this is money and this is like what we're going to use to gauge if you're good or bad, or if you're successful or not successful. That's a concept that man has come up with. And I think that Bitcoin is going to kind of remove that shell of what money is and what real value is. And real value is accepting humanity as a one entity, force where, we can, as a collective, build things and come together for the greater good and not the greater bad.
So you talk about decentralization, yeah. So Bitcoin stands for decentralization. Then we have the human consciousness. Do you see yourself and your consciousness as a decentralized being, or do you sense yourself as a centralized being?
I would say I'm definitely decentralized. I think that, me being African American, me coming from or having parents from countries that have dealt with, colonialism and, other forms of control down the road in history, I think that I've always had a different outlook on money and what value is and, where I want to be in my life in the future, as a parent now and as someone that has to secure the future for my family. I always look at how do I get a head start? How do I join this race that has been started well before me, where people at the top control a large percentage of the wealth and control certain things, and the 99% at the bottom are all fighting for crumbs, right? So I look at Bitcoin like, it's inelastic to price versus scarcity. And the Bitcoin price goes up, but the supply remains the same. The price goes down, the supply remains the same. Everything else, whether it be stocks or real estate, is impacted by supply, which impacts the price. And I think that price impacts people's lives, because when you look at currently today, you have like gas prices going up, you have the cost of food going up, you have a shortage of baby formula, for example. And I think that all of those things impact people's consciousness, it impacts people's emotions and how they feel about, are they doing the right things? Am I working hard enough to feed my family? Do I have enough money to put petrol in my vehicle? So I think that as people start to become tired of this like up and down flow of volatility, they're also going to start to look at a more decentralized future where it's better off to have a barter system or to have a system where you can pass information and value peer to peer effortlessly, free and fast, versus having someone say, hey, wait a minute, before I give Sama this value, I need 50 cents from that for you to transact with him or to have a conversation with him about enlightenment. And I think that slows down innovation. It stifles creativity, and it kind of puts humanity in this place of fear where like they're not sure if they're going to be accepted or if they have the ability to pass on this information or this value without having some form of control dictate if that can be done or not.
How do you work to raise your consciousness? Like if you believe in this model and that it will be good for the world, what's your path?
So, my path is kind of interesting too, because how I really got into meditation and kind of like focusing in on some of these concepts, well before I read the book, is I'm a martial artist. So I really was into martial arts from a young age. And, it's really crazy because I have a lot of books that I consider my favorite. Power versus Force is definitely one, but there's one in particular called The Art of the Samurai. And there's a quote I carry with me when I become impatient, and I also use it during my Bitcoin journey and during FUD and volatility. And the quote goes something like this. Hopefully, I don't butcher this. There is something to be learned from a rainstorm. When meeting with a sudden shower, you try not to get wet and run quickly along the road. But doing such things as passing under the eaves of houses, you still get wet. When you are resolved from the beginning, you will not be perplexed, though you will still get the same soaking. This understanding extends to everything. That quote from that book always reminds me that, you know, Bitcoin doesn't care about your impatience, your greed, or your political aspirations. It only cares about you having conviction and resolve. And, it's bigger than money. It's bigger than a lot of these things that we hold dear to each other. And I think that me as a human being, me as an individual, I've always really tried to be still. And I always try to not perplex myself or be flummoxed in the crazy things that I see going on in society and in the world. I just have to really understand that this is all a part of the process. This is all a part of my journey. And, the good things that I do, the bad things that I do is all a story being written down in the universe where I have to really map out and figure out, what is my purpose? What is it that I need to do while I'm here? What is it that I need to do to change the lives of other people? And I think that a lot of human beings have a hard time with that because they're in a comfortable place or they're in a place of dysfunction. And being a martial artist, I've always had the ability to have great teachers, great senseis, and people that were in my life where we could have these conversations around, Taoism and meditation and Buddhism and understanding the physics of your human capabilities versus your mental capabilities. So for me, I kind of got lucky in that sense where from a younger age, I was able to kind of have these experiences where a lot of people may not have.
I see. And do you consciously try to not act with force and in your life, like in your daily life? And how do you see the difference between power and force in your daily life?
That's a very good question, Sama, too, because I think that I'm a human being just like everybody else. And I think that I struggle with force versus power a lot in my life, just because, like it's a lot of things that are out of our control. And sometimes, just through the constant bombardment of social media, the constant bombardment of the news media and all these other things, it can really play a toll on your consciousness. And I think that for me, what's really helped me a lot, gaining more power and being more empowered spiritually, is kind of limiting my access to social media, limiting my access to what the news is saying, and kind of like letting the universe speak to me, letting myself go into nature and take hikes and kind of like breathe in the fresh air and listen to the rivers running, and just kind of like getting those answers subconsciously from, my inner self. And I think that as society continues to move along, and even for me, like I have to make it a part of my day-to-day life to get out into nature and to kind of be still. And I think that that allows me to have those daily affirmations of, whenever I feel angry or in fear or something, I can kind of sit back, let me breathe. Like in the Art of the Samurai, they talk about a decision should be made in the space of 7 breaths. So if you breathe 7 times, then you make a decision. If you're angry about something, you breathe 7 times and then you let it go. And I think that those are things that are very, very important in this society. That's why you have so much anxiety and frustration with people. Even when you see people driving along the road in traffic, you can almost feel the people that are like out of control when they're driving, And those are the people that need to definitely take 7 breaths and really figure out like where they stand on this energetic field of consciousness, and like how important their energy is to other people and how that reflects or can be absorbed by other people.
Yeah, in Bitcoin, we have don't trust, verify. And
Yep.
This also works in the realm of like critical thinking and to what you said, like 7 breaths, rather than just do automatically what everyone else does. That you check in with yourself. So, and I see it can be almost like, your rational mind is checking with your intuitive mind, or you can say that your rational mind is asking the heart, what do you want to do?
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like an individual version of don't trust, verify. What do you think of that?
We put trust in certain things, right? So like when you look at paper money or you look at like currency notes, like they talk about trust on certain notes, especially the American dollar, they talk about trust. And also, there's no way to verify if that dollar holds value. There's no way to verify if that dollar is truly backed by what it says it's backed by, unless you can gain access to Fort Knox or something. So I think that us as human beings, we have this battle between verifying and trusting not only the outside entities, but also ourselves. Can we trust ourselves to make the right choices? And like I said earlier in the podcast, where I said that human beings are having a hard problem with solving their own problems because we've been made so soft in a sense from, the rewards and the highs of life where, we don't have to hunt for our own food. We don't have to grow our own vegetables. We don't have to farm. So those things, those struggles and those things kind of bring a level of trust that you can do certain things and that you can achieve things that are difficult to achieve. And I think that, the cushiness of society that we have now may be changing rapidly down the road. And I think that it's going to force people kind of into this place of like verification where like, okay, as a collective, we have to trust each other, and then we have to verify that we can do this. We can actually achieve great things without the control of the power of, the way things have been of old. So I think that that strengthening and weakening of positive and negative stimuli is going to be something that is going to be very important in the future.
Yeah, and it's really important to create space in our lives to be able to, because you said that we are becoming comfortable, and in a sense we need to become comfortable to be able to connect with our true selves, but not comfortable in a way of completely distracting ourselves with pleasures and stuff like that, but creating space for our true self to blossom in this environment.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think that the outcomes of human beings accessing truth, or that true signal, is what's going to allow them to lead a fulfilling life. And I think that the ability to detect what level of consciousness that you're on individually is going to be something that will bolster meaningful relationships and bolster a place of stillness and understanding of not being in fear, because you can trust in humanity. A lot of people don't trust in humanity right now. They're very fearful. They don't know what's going to happen. You're seeing a lot of craziness going on in the world. And I think that is kind of a reflection of how we feel energetically as a species right now. And, I think that the world needs to realize like, hey, like something's off, like something's wrong. Like this isn't normal behavior for, an organism that is highly intelligent and has, the understanding of right from wrong and can kind of figure out complex problems. This is kind of a primal kind of, instinct where like that lizard brain is kind of kicking in now. So I think that, levels of consciousness is going to be a very important topic that humanity has to discuss and work at in the very near future.
But maybe some Bitcoiners listening to this, maybe they feel like, should I also measure my consciousness? Like I already have to measure your IQ, and then it becomes like a competition. And so I'm better than you because I'm on a higher level or stuff like this. But you're saying that for you, this model helped you to realize where you are, and you don't feel so competitive about it, or?
Yeah, most definitely. And I think that like, if you do a scale of consciousness for yourself, I don't think that that's something that you really need to share publicly or with people, to say like, hey, like my number is this number versus your number. I think that is kind of something that you can gauge individually for yourself to say, okay, this is where I'm at. if I don't like where I'm at, this is what I need to do to go towards working on that and to make myself a better person. And I think that Bitcoiners can do that within themselves. So it's like they have to figure out, why do I want to use Bitcoin? Why is Bitcoin important for me? And then after you figure out those things, then it's like, okay, where does my level of consciousness fit in with Bitcoin? And what am I going to do with the Bitcoin once I gain it? And how am I going to use that on a conscious level to make this place better, this place called Earth better? And I think that in a quiet, private area, you can write down that number and actively create goals for yourself to say like, hey, I want to reach this level of enlightenment. And these are the processes that I have to go through to get there. And I can use Bitcoin to help me with that, which is I can give people Satoshis, or I can use my Bitcoin towards philanthropy or towards something that I feel is important to me to help this society become better.
Yeah. And I have to say that I think your estimate of Bitcoin's frequency sounds quite low. In my opinion, Bitcoin's frequency is really, really high. Because it's created, so it has a frequency, and I think it's like 800, 900 or something like that, and Bitcoin will help then, so everyone who connects with Bitcoin will sort of be boosted up the same way as you listen to a song that has 600, then you become inspired by that, and I think the same thing is happening with Bitcoin. But maybe you meant sort of the community now. It's 350.
Yeah. You know what's funny, Sama? Like, I think about Bitcoin like, the technique of sun gazing. I think that, like, I look at Bitcoin as like the sun. It's like this super bright, super high level energetic ball of monetary energy, right? And I think that, like, currently right now, if you took someone to say, hey, like, let's go sun gazing, like, how long can you look at the sun before you A, go blind, or B, can't take the intense heat and light of looking at this ball of sun? For someone that's just first looking at the sun, they're not going to be able to do it. And I think that because Bitcoin is so new and so early, that energetic level, whether it's 350 or 400 or 700, I think that humanity is not ready to really do a sun gazing mission. I think that over time, as they continue to practice and adopt Bitcoin and understand what Bitcoin really is, outside of number go up, outside of, oh, it's at this price today versus this price tomorrow, I really think that that's where we're at, because I don't think that a lot of people are truly ready to understand Bitcoin and truly ready to let go of the fiat legacy banking system. They're still kind of like one toe in, one toe out. And I think that sun gazing is probably like the best example I could think of, where it takes people years to really get to a place where they can gaze at the sun, and it kind of opens up those corneas and it opens up a place of enlightenment in your mind just from doing that meditative process of waking up early and looking at the sun before it gets super, super bright in the sky. And that's how I think of Bitcoin, is like the sun, like the central entity of energy and light for our solar system.
Yeah, and this is also the Bitcoin rabbit hole that people talk about, right? Because if we look at it at these levels, and if we say that Bitcoin is 900 or something like that, just an example, then this is when people start studying Bitcoin, it feels like a never ending. And if it's never ending, then it will be even more than 900. But if it's 900, it's still very, 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 very high level. So if people go further and further and further down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, they will also go up on the scale of consciousness as they understand it more and more.
Yes, most definitely. Everybody's different, and everybody can handle certain energy levels and other people cannot. And I think that, Bitcoin being for everybody also means that it meets you where you're at, and, like you said, like, you think the energy level is a lot higher. I do too, but I think that people are not ready to access that higher level of energy yet. They're still in a place of infancy in regards to economics and philosophy and consciousness, and understanding that Bitcoin is kind of like this anomaly that just showed up, and people weren't really ready for it. People weren't really prepared to understand like what it's really going to do for our our species. And even as we start to traverse space and we start to go to these other planets, like I truly feel like Bitcoin will be used in those places as well, whether it's the blockchain or some of these other entities that Bitcoin has, these properties that Bitcoin has. And I think that humanity has a lot of growing up to do. We all have a lot of growing up to do. And I think that once we realize, like, oh, we can harness the sun in our hands, and we can harness the sun and pass a piece of that sun to each and every person to give them their own ray of sunlight, that's when people are going to start to say, like, oh, like, I understand what Satoshi was trying to do now. Like, I understand that, being anonymous and not kind of showboating and not trying to say, like, hey, I'm the creator of this and you guys have to worship me, or you guys have to, put me on this pedestal. To make myself anonymous and just give out a gift to the world is something that's huge and very important.
I have the map of consciousness in front of me. So, and in the podcast notes, I will try to include a link to this so people can see it. And I just had this insight, maybe, that many people step on the Bitcoin rabbit hole around fear, desire, anger. And then what happens when they go in and they learn more and more, then they get into pride, courage, and all of a sudden they're in neutrality. And then they start working on Bitcoin projects, they start connecting with Bitcoiners, and then they go on and they learn more and more. So it's really like the Bitcoiners' journey can really be a mirror here in this map of consciousness also.
A lot of people gravitate towards Bitcoin, due to force, due to, regret or anxiety of not having a store of value, or, being disappointed in the banking system, or being disappointed in their government, the way that they handle their citizens, or the way that they treat people that are different or don't go by the status quo. And I think that all of those things kind of push people into a place of this scale that Hawkins has, where, like you said, their journey is kind of a growing process as you come in. When you first start in Bitcoin, you're not going to be at the same place as someone that's been in Bitcoin for 10 years or for 8 years or for 5 years. So I think that it's a race that, you have to do inwardly. And, by connecting with people, talking to people such as yourself, you can gain insight. You can gain some enlightenment from talking to people to say, like, hey, like, Sama has this great insight on Bitcoin and consciousness. And, like, this is someone that I would want to listen to or have a conversation with so that I can get better on my journey as a Bitcoiner.
Yeah. And how do you think all the knowledge that you've been talking about here today, how will this influence how you raise your daughter?
That's a great question. I'm a big fan of, like, documentation. I'm a big fan of reading and history and books. And I think that all of the stuff that I talk about, all the stuff that I write about, I think that it's really going to help my daughter because, as a parent, as a kid, when you're growing up, like, you really don't tend to listen to your parents as much until you're a lot older and you can understand where they're coming from. You usually get really influenced by, like, your uncles or your cousins or, people like in your family structure, but they're not that close. And I think that closeness sometimes can kind of, like, distract, or you don't really take the information in as good. And for me, I have a lot of books out, I have a lot of podcasts out. And I think that these are things that in the future she can sit down and really listen to, outside of me having that, like, pressure or influence on her to say, like, hey, this is what I was talking about when you were this age. And these are the things that I foresaw was going to happen with Bitcoin and with money and with the future. And I think that documentation is huge. Podcasts are huge because you can sit down and put your headphones in and really listen to people on a place where you're not right in front of them or you're not pressured. And I think that my goal is that I want her to kind of really be an open book to networking and having, really good relationships, keeping your promises, being a person that is, astute and stand up in society and stand for something, or, fall for anything. Like, that's kind of like my mentality, like, stand for something, stand for truth, stand for light, and, try to really package in and learn as much as you can about things from very intelligent people, very enlightened people, and highly spiritual people.
And how will you try to teach her stuff at the same time as you want her to stay true to herself? This balance. Do you have a plan for this strategy for that, or you will just learn as you go?
I think a lot of parenting is just a lot of learning as you go. There's no real manual to being a parent. And I think that each person that comes on this planet, they all have their own journey, their own destiny, their own goals, their own aspirations. And I think as a parent, my job is just to notice and pick up on what she's good at, what her strengths are, and kind of like bolster those and manifest those and make those greater. When she gets to a place where she can consciously have a real conversation with me and understand some of these skills of consciousness, then that's when I can really imprint some of the teachings that I've had in my life as an adult, and kind of give her like, these aren't things that you have to, have set in stone and absolutely follow. But it's always good to just have a wide variety of ideas and understandings about life. That's why I'm a big reader. I'm an avid reader. And I think that being rapacious in reading is very important, because when someone verbally tells you something, it's different than just opening a book, being still and having to mentally digest it on your own. And I think that that's going to be really important for her in the future, especially now where we're in an age of information where a lot of people are distracted because you have an overdose of so much information, so many different things going on, so many different distractions, that I personally think that things like podcasts and books are going to become very important for her generation, because there's going to be this mass overload of information, and you're just going to want to like kind of slow down and just like take things in bits and pieces so that you can have a better understanding of the planet as you traverse through this digital age that we're currently going through.
So maybe tell our listeners where they can find your work.
I can be found on Twitter. My Twitter handle is _Dawdu, _DAWDU. You can find all of my writing, my blogs, my books at my website, www.iamdawdu.com. That is spelled IAMDAWDU.com. And those are kind of the two places that I'm really very active on. I'm very active on Twitter, so look for me there. A lot of my writings can be found on my Medium account, which is also connected to my website. Some of the main places that people can find me.
Great. Thank you so much for coming on here to tell us about your thoughts around consciousness and Bitcoin.
Alrighty. Thank you, Sama. Appreciate it.